Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome General J. Raymond, Acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller, Secretary of the Air Force Barbara Barrett, and the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence.
Since the dawn of the space age, the United States has long understood that access to space and freedom to maneuver in space underwrites our economy, our passion for science and exploration, and our national security. Recognizing that this vital national interest could no longer be taken for granted, the United States elevated space inside the Department of Defense to a level commensurate with its importance to our nation. Just a year ago, on 20 December 2019, at a hangar at Andrews Air Force Base, the President signed into law the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the birth certificate of the United States Space Force. And what a first year it has been. The men and women of the Space Force have written an impressive, very impressive first chapter of our history, and I couldn't be more proud of them. So, on behalf of all of the space professionals in the United States Space Force, I want to thank President Trump, Vice President Pence, and Congress for establishing this force. In every sector of space, America is leading, and because of that, our nation is more secure. A special thanks to Vice President Pence for hosting today's ceremony. Sir, we can't thank you enough. I also want to thank Secretary Miller, Secretary Barrett, General Milley, General Hyten, for your trust and confidence, and for the privilege, the absolute privilege of serving alongside the men and women of the United States Space Force. Each American armed service traces its origin to a critical moment in our nation's history. Our Army, Navy, and Marine Corps were established in the crucible of America's Revolutionary War. The Air Force became an independent service after the Allied victory in World War II, as America steeled itself for a new Cold War. And with the reemergence of great power competition in all domains, the nation established the United States Space Force. While each service's culture and mission are distinct, what is common between us is the warfighting spirit and commitment to victory embraced by America's treasure, its all-volunteer force. The members of the Space Force are no different. We come to work every day focused on the great responsibility we've been given to custom build this force to compete, deter, and to win. That requires the boldness of Colonels Casey Beard and Christopher Ningle, who led a team that built the first Space Force doctrine, the first independent space power doctrine. It requires the agility and innovation demonstrated by Senior Airman Bailey Bork, who wrote a new piece of software at Vandenberg Air Force Base and embedded that software on the ops floor, improving our ability to have space domain awareness. And it's the commitment to victory displayed by Captain Tasia Reed and Lieutenant Christiana Castaneda, whose mission planning ensured the successful detection of Iranian missiles and preserved the lives of U.S. personnel and our partner forces in Iraq. I have complete trust and confidence in the force that we've built. I know they will deliver on the solemn promise we've made to protect and defend this nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic, with a warfighting spirit and our touchstone traits of agility, innovation, and boldness. On the occasion of our first birthday, I thank you all for your visionary leadership and your enduring support. We have made history together, and looking back, I'm confident we will stand in awe of our efforts to ensure the United States Space Force and the United States is always above. Happy first birthday and Semper Supra. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to introduce our Secretary of the Air Force, Barbara Barrett. You know, this has been a pretty easy job when you have a Secretary of the Air Force that cares so much about what you do and has made the #1 priority of the Department of the Air Force the establishment of the Space Force. Ma'am, thank you for your passion and for your leadership.
Thank you, General Raymond. What a pleasure it is to be a part of a team headed by the leadership of General J. Raymond. Call him Hap Raymond, but it's an Air Force thing. You know, for millennia, humanity has turned its gaze to the stars for inspiration. Today, we celebrate the nation's newest service, dedicated to protecting free and open access to the ultimate high ground for all benevolent actors. With the leadership of President Trump, the coordination and cooperation with Congress on bipartisan effort, the clear vision of a service was established to protect the American way of life, and it was launched under the name of the United States Space Force. No one has been a better champion of that effort than our Vice President, Mike Pence. You know, all but two of the United States military services were established when George Washington was president. Then, technology opened two new domains. Yesterday, we celebrated the first flight by Wilbur and Orville Wright, a flight that laid the cornerstone for the U.S. Air Force. And today, we celebrate the protection of space assets by the new U.S. Space Force. In its first year, you might have expected a Space Force to build a new headquarters leadership team, maybe to publish planning guidance, maybe to transfer 2,500 airmen from the United States Air Force into the Space Force. And maybe you might have thought that they would be able to establish a force multiplier program to generate a digitally fluent Space Force. The Space Force, in fact, did all of that. But because of the bold leadership of J. Raymond and his team, the Space Force also detected incoming missiles in Iraq 5 days after the elimination of Soleimani, and ultimately saved a great number of American lives. The United States Space Force completed its first national security space launch. It conducted space war games with Five Eyes partners as well as France and Germany. The Space Force anticipated International Space Station collision risk with space debris, and the ISS maneuvered to avoid that risk, ensuring the safety of our astronauts and the space station. And for the first time in nearly a decade, the United States Space Force supported the launch of American astronauts from American soil on an American space capsule. And so why does this matter? Well, it matters because every day, almost every American uses space, often without knowing it. Space controls our water, our power, and our banking. Space powers our information, navigation, and communication systems. Whether you're an Eastern urbanite or a Midwestern farmer or a hiker in the high Sierras, you're probably using space. Space must, therefore, be protected for all benevolent actors. Today, we salute the vision of the United States Space Force because that vision and the leadership of the United States Space Force is defending the ultimate high ground for our nation. Semper Supra. And now, let me introduce and invite you to welcome the Secretary, the Acting Secretary of Defense, Chris Miller, who draws on myriad experiences both in counterterrorism and in special operations to offer unique insights into the space domain. Ladies and gentlemen, Secretary Miller.
Great job. Don't tell anybody. My only dream when I was growing up was to join the Air Force and become an astronaut. And clearly my parents cursed me with bad genes, and I had to get these things disqualifying me. But today, I had to end up going into the Army and being a ground pounder. But today, you'll notice, I'm wearing my Air Force socks. Do not tell anyone in the Army. They'll think I'm a heretic. I hope there's not an ethics violation here, but I'm ready for some Space Force socks whenever they come out. We'll make sure they get routed. Just saying. What an incredible day. I'm humbled and beyond words to be able to be part of this. Secretary Barrett, Vice Chairman Heighton, General Raymond, family, welcome. What a day, what an historic day. Many other leaders here today, all around here. Thank you. Thank you for your vision, vital role you played in standing up the Space Force. Sounds cliche at this point following these great leaders. Very special thanks to President Trump, Vice President Pence as well. They spearheaded this effort, truly an historic effort. Sixth branch of the United States Armed Forces 1 year ago today. You know, when I was a kid, I told you, when somebody would go, what do you want to be when you grow up? I grew up in the 70s. What did you say? I want to be an astronaut. My son's 19, he grew up in the 2000s, and when I'd ask him, you know, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'd get all sorts of wacky stuff about, I want to be a baseball player or lacrosse player. You know, it broke my heart, you know, because that's where our country had come to with our space, in the space domain. And you know, because of you all, our sons and our daughters now, when they're asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? Guess what they're going to say again? Astronaut. This administration's bold decision to create the first new service in over 70 years, I love that. HAP. What the heck? What a great description. And you know, to talk about the historic legacy going back, the HAP Raymond. You know, I know you're just nodding your head. That's not, but that's really so telling and so remarkable. And first, you know, service in 70 years, you know, it really marked an important step forward in deterring the threats posed by our strategic competitors, ones that extend beyond traditional warfighting domains. It was necessary to step in this area. It was a necessary step in this area of great power competition that we're in now, marked by revisionist powers, fielding new weapons that put our satellites and space-based systems at risk. And it was a recognition of the importance of securing freedom of operation in what is now a highly contested environment, space. True to the motto of Semper Supra, our men and women in uniform have already taken the Space Force to new heights in an incredibly short time. General Raymond noted publishing the service's first space power doctrine earlier this year and establishing Space Operations Command. To commissioning 86 graduates. 86 graduates came out of the Air Force Academy this year in launching their careers into the Space Force. Secretary talked about launching the service's first satellite into orbit as well. And just last week, the first group of directly enlisted space professionals celebrated their graduation from basic military training. One of the absolute joys I've had in this job is signing commissioning recommendations, moving officers from the United States Air Force to the Space Force. You know, again, that was just a humbling event. As our strategic competitors weaponize the space domain through the development of anti-satellite missiles, directed energy weapons, and other counter-space technologies, our personnel will lead the way in preserving freedom of use, commerce, and navigation into and through space for all. Much like NASA pioneered a new generation of technologies in the 20th century, our space professionals will be the ones fostering cutting-edge innovation that will protect our advantages across every domain in the decades ahead. And they will be the ones to ensure that the United States is ready to defend our assets in space, to stand up for freedom of navigation in the shared domain, and ultimately to win any future conflict. The great strides made by the Space Force have been made possible thanks to the bipartisan support of Congress, the hard work of our service members that was highlighted earlier, civilians, and let's not forget it, our contracted workforce, which is truly one of our competitive advantages, and the leadership of General Raymond, both as commander of U.S. Space Command and as the first chief Space Operations. Kind of a great title, just saying. Additionally, we are incredibly grateful to the Vice President for his leadership of the National Space Council. That's game changing. Getting that thing going again, Vice President, and your leadership of that was transformative. And none of this would have happened without you just leaning in on this and just pushing so hard. His advocacy on behalf of our armed forces, and I see, most people don't see this regularly. I see it all the time. The leadership of the Vice President, his care and his compassion for our men and women in uniform and their families is remarkable. Your advocacy on behalf of our armed forces and a new generation of space professionals continues to make us stronger, safer, and more secure as we maintain American superiority in the ultimate high ground. Mr. Vice President, I'm going off script again, I know, but I just want to personally thank you. We've been through some stuff. We've gone through some of the most complex military operations this country's ever conducted, and your steady hand and your leadership during those was a great source of strength for me. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your character. Thank you for your selfless service. Thank you for commitment. Thank you for being a mentor to me, Mr. Vice President. And with that, the floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you all for being here today. To Acting Secretary of Defense Chris Miller, to the Secretary of the Air Force Barbara Barrett, to General John Hyten, General J. Raymond, General James Dickinson, General David Thompson, and General David Alvin. On behalf of the First Family, welcome to the White House, and welcome to the first anniversary of that branch of our armed forces that will ensure for generations that America remains as dominant in space as we are on land and sea and air. Welcome to the first anniversary of the United States Space Force. Many kind things have been said about your Vice President, but I have to tell you, I am the second biggest champion of the Space Force in this administration. So as we begin, allow me to bring greetings and first anniversary congratulations from a champion of everyone who wears the uniform of the United States and the founder of the United States Space Force. I bring greetings and congratulations from the 45th President of the United States, President Donald Trump. We just left the Oval Office with the President, and from the very first moment that he conceived of the idea of creating a new branch of our armed forces dedicated to our security in space, he has been an enthusiast, and I can testify, as the Acting Secretary and the Secretary of the Air Force can attest, that enthusiasm has only grown in the last year, and he's proud of each and every one of you, as I am. But we're grateful to the contributions of all of you in this room and to the speakers who have preceded me at this podium for bringing us to the fruition of this first year, but more importantly, bringing us to this day, a year ago Sunday, that saw the creation of the first new branch of our armed forces in more than 70 years. And there are members of Congress who are with us today who I remember in those critical moments in the legislative process who were absolutely indispensable. And I'd like you to join me in thanking Congressman Doug Lamburn for your great leadership on behalf of our Space Force. And the first person ever to mention to me that we ought to restart the National Space Council, even before I had this job. He is one of the greatest champions of American leadership in space in the Congress of the United States, Congressman Brian Babin. Thank you. And I want to give particular note to a member of the United States Senate who, in the late going, was there fighting to ensure that we would establish a new branch of our armed forces that would have a foundation of independence to be able to grow for generations and serve the security of our nation. So join me in thanking Senator Kevin Kramer for your outstanding and seminal leadership. I also want to take a moment to express my appreciation to two members of Congress who are not here, but who have been and remain champions and emblematic of the bipartisan support that this new branch of our armed forces enjoys across the Congress of the United States. Join me in thanking Congressman Adam Smith, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and the incoming ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, Congressman Mike Rogers, two leaders who have championed the United States Space Force. And it's my greatest honor to be here with so many warriors who have stood in the gap for America, and to be able to thank you for your service, and to thank you for the foundation that you've helped pour for future generations of Americans in our security in space. There are several people to thank, but there's a man who I consider to be a giant in the realm of American leadership in space. He's a former commander of the Air Force Space Command. I first met him at Offutt Air Force Base when he was leading our strategic command forces there. He actually comes from a family that's been involved in American space enterprise throughout his life, and at just the right time, he became Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Would you join me in thanking General John Hyten and his wonderful wife, Laura? I know the President knows is what I know. We wouldn't be here without you, General. So thank you so very much for your strong leadership. But to all the members of our armed forces with us here today, thank you for your service to our great nation. And thank you for your enthusiastic participation in this first year of the launch of the United States Space Force. You know, yesterday marked the birthday of flight. History records that it was 117 years ago that two sons of a heartland preacher, one of whom was born in Indiana, did what for all of history had seemed impossible when they took their first flight to the skies over Kitty Hawk. But in just a few short days, on Sunday, December the 20th, we will mark the formal anniversary of another American breakthrough. On Sunday, it will be 1 year since President Donald Trump signed into law the first new branch of our armed forces in more than 70 years. That historic moment was the culmination of an effort that began from the early days of this administration, from almost the first moment that the President and I spoke about space when we were campaigning for these jobs. He had a dual focus of renewing American leadership in human space exploration, but also ensuring that America remained as dominant in space as we are in land and air and sea. And from the first day of this administration, President Trump called forth steps to renew American leadership in space. It would be in June of 2018, the President first laid out a vision that called for the creation of a new military service focused solely on threats in and from space. The idea, though, and its conception was not a new one. For more than 50 years, presidents and military leaders had discussed a branch of our military dedicated to ensuring American national security in and from space, but time and again, those efforts faltered. But I would submit to you that it is a tribute to the leadership of our Commander-in-Chief, a tribute to the extraordinary military leadership gathered here today, that this time, with bipartisan support, in just 1.5 years, the United States Space Force was born. And since that historic moment, the United States Space Force has only grown stronger by the day. And that means that America has grown more secure by the day. After the Space Force became law, the President's first decision was who would lead it. And the President and I get the sense in the room, there is broad agreement that he got that decision right too. He chose a man who you've heard from these podiums already is considered to be the Hap Arnold of our time. He would become the Chief of Space Operations of the United States Space Force, and I can tell you, having witnessed his leadership firsthand, that when General J. Raymond stepped forward, it brought the leadership, the energy, the vision, the professionalism, and the patriotism necessary to have this historic year for the United States Space Force. So join me in thanking General J. Raymond, his wonderful wife Molly, and his proud son Gary for all of their commitment to America. Thank you, General. Great job. It's amazing to think that this spring, General Raymond actually welcomed the first enlisted member to the Space Force. So how about a round of applause for Chief Master Sergeant Roger Tauberman. You can stand up. Come on, stand up. Thank you. Thank you, Chief. In April, those two men were literally the entire United States Space Force. But in just 8 months, we already have more than 2,000 military members, space professionals, in the United States Space Force. And I'm told that an additional 3,600 officers and enlisted airmen have already started to fill out the paperwork to transfer into the Space Force. In fact, General Raymond tells us that we anticipate on our current trajectory the Space Force will have nearly 6,000 space professionals serving all across the globe in just a short period of time. In fact, today the Space Force got its newest and perhaps most famous member, a man who is actually in space right now at the International Space Station. General Raymond took care of the paperwork, and I think it might actually be the first in-orbit transfer in military history. Colonel Michael Hopkins, NASA astronaut and member of the United States Space Force. Great man. You know, heroes like him and like all of you are going to inspire generations of Americans. In fact, Secretary Barbara Barrett and I witnessed some of those young Americans stepping forward in Colorado Springs, where we both had the opportunity to address the 62nd graduation of the United States Air Force Academy. When I was there, they told me in a typical year, about 20 cadets choose to go into space operations. This year, I was there when 86 cadets stood up and took the oath as officers in the United States Space Force. And just to continue to build on the momentum, I'm proud to report to the Senator and these members of Congress and all those looking on that it was my honor, with Secretary Barrett at my side and General Raymond as well, that we made it official. We traveled to Florida to announce the first 2 Space Force installations in American history, Cape Canaveral Space Force Station and Patrick Space Force Base. And the Space Force is growing stronger every day, and just in the nick of time. I think every one of the military leaders here knows that space is a vacuum, but we're not operating in a vacuum. The space race began in the 1950s, and it continues today. And in President Donald Trump, we have a commander-in-chief who's understood clearly that space is a warfighting domain. And it's imperative that we invest the resources and the personnel and the technology to defend our nation and defend our values in the outer reaches of space. In fact, The United States, as you've heard already, faces emerging threats in space from countries like China and Russia, and those threats are only growing. We were reminded of that just this week when Russia conducted yet another anti-satellite missile launch. We're leading in space, but our determination under this president and with his extraordinary military leadership is to stay in the lead to defend America and defend our freedom from space. We seek peace through strength. And I want to say to the men and women of the United States Space Force, when it comes to the outer reaches of space, you are that strength. So today we celebrate leadership from our president to great bipartisan support in the Congress and the military leadership that has seen to both the birth and the pouring of the first year's foundation of the United States Space Force. And I just came here today to thank each and every one of you, but also to make another announcement. As I mentioned, we just returned from the Oval Office, and so it is my honor, on behalf of the President of the United States, to announce that henceforth, the men and women of the United States Space Force will be known as Guardians. Soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians will be defending our nation for generations to come. So with that announcement, let me just say thank you again. I want to thank the members of Congress who are with us today. Thank you for the honor of your presence, but more importantly, thank you. Thank you for your leadership in bringing us to this moment 1 year ago, and the support that you've continued to provide to see to the launch of this new branch of our armed forces. But on behalf of your Commander-in-Chief, let me urge each and every one of you Guardians to keep pushing. Keep pushing. Keep pushing the vision and the mission of the United States Space Force, which is to ensure that America remains as dominant in space and from space as we are on land and sea and air. And to each one of you Guardians, let me just say, each and every day from this day forward, I want to assure you that you will serve with the confidence of your Commander-in-Chief. You will serve with the confidence and gratitude of the American people. And I'm also convinced that those of you that will serve in the United States Space Force in this generation and generations to come will also go with the prayers of millions of Americans who will claim that ancient verse that promises that if you rise on the wings of the dawn, if you settle on the far side of the sea, even if you go up to the heavens, that there his hand will guide you and his right hand will hold you fast. That then will be our prayer for our guardians in this generation and for generations to come. So happy birthday to the United States Space Force. God bless our guardians. God bless all the members of our armed forces. And God bless America. Semper Super.